I'm delighted to have a chance to speak at this venue again. My last time at San Jacinto, I'm not where my, okay, enlarge please. There we go. The last time I was here was for San Jacinto Day of the 21st April in 2022, and I gave the speech outside. And I remember the wind was blowing a full gale that day. And if a kindly audience member had not caught my remarks as they fluttered down toward the reflecting pool, it would have been a very short speech. Not fair, they actually made me cry that day because the Sons of the Republic. This was the day before I moved to Colorado. Okay, I wasn't going to go there. Parentheses. Having lived in Austin 46 years, I found myself in a position, being an older white male, it was very, very difficult to get publishing jobs at that time. And I took a job as writer in residence on a guest ranch in Colorado, way up in the Rockies, at 9,000 feet, which is double Denver. Now, down here, the air is 21% oxygen. Up there, the air is 14% oxygen. And they don't write about this in the tourist brochures, but there's a certain percentage of people who cannot make new red blood cells on demand, and you either leave or you die. In fact, I went to our little one-horse county clinic, and the nurse put the clamp on my finger to check my O2 saturation, and she wrote down 91. I said, whoa, that's kind of bad, isn't it? And she looked around the waiting room of octogenarian chain smokers and said, no, around here, that's actually pretty good. So I got out. When hypoxia becomes chronic, they call it mountain sickness. And so my best buddy, Mike Miller, who was running, you're nodding, you know what I'm talking about, ran the Rosenberg Library in Galveston, called me up and said, Pack, I'm coming to get you. You're going to live with Karina and me until you get a new plan. So I went to Galveston. I went from 9,000 feet to 9 feet. And I got most of my lungs back. I didn't get all my lungs back, but most of them. And I got a fun job working for the Historical Association, Historical Foundation in Galveston, giving walking history tours of the mansions on Broadway and the historic churches downtown. And I got up to 5.5 miles a day walking backwards and yelling at people. So when I got other jobs to do and I got to go back to Austin, okay, I'm not as young as I used to be. And as I age, I never know how many more occasions like this I'm going to have a chance to address things that I think are important to the historical community. So I'm always a bit conflicted whether I should just address the topic at hand and be nice, be bland, and keep my thoughts to myself. But now, you know, as the first Elizabeth said near her end, it has changed and the case is altered with me. So I'm going to have a few things to say about Texas historiography as I get to the end of this. Now, up to now, I've kept this impulse in check. But I think what changed was I passed personally a pretty significant milestone. My first book came out 50 years ago last month. I'm happy to say, thank you. Well, even better, I'm happy to say that it's still in print. In fact, I recently banked a royalty check for $12.40. So I'm feeling differently about how I approach public speaking now. All right. A class of which cultures? I'm sure I am not the only student of Texas history who has noticed an increase in recent years of scholars. Mike Campbell was one, Frank de la Teja is another, referring to the Texas Revolution as a clash of cultures. Now, when I was growing up, the active question seemed to be whose fault the revolution was. And I'm sure some of us are old enough to remember that. What put me in mind to raise a question of just what cultural conflict is was preparing a second edition of that first book, which was a history of the Red River Indian War of 1874. This was the last resistance offered by the Comanche, Kiowa, and Southern Cheyenne people to Anglo conquest. I researched this book as an undergraduate for 6 hours of independent study credit, supervised by the peerless Dr. Elliott West, Parkman Prize, Western History Association president. Long of the University of Arkansas. This was during his early career at the University of Texas in Arlington. In fact, I was in the first class he taught after he got his PhD from the University of Colorado. This is a classic case that one could posit as a conflict of cultures. The army goes out and they have an Indian war, right? But the closer I looked, there were so many cross currents that they almost blurred out cultural clash. The army rode out after the natives, of course. But among those native Indians, parenthetical pause, please don't come up to me later and say, why didn't you say Native American? The truth is, I gave a talk in Phoenix some years ago, and I used the phrase Native Americans, and I got jumped on like I had used the N-word. It seemed that that is no longer the preferred reference. I was stunned to discover that they are Indians again. I had dinner that evening with a former neighbor, Bruce, now living in Phoenix, who follows Native culture quite closely. He had recently gotten some FaceTime with Russell Means of the American Indian movement near the end of his life. Bruce used the term Native American and was also taken down for this faux pas. And that is why now I say Native Indian and just dare people to give me the look. Right? Okay, close parenthetical. But in the Indian Territory in 1874, not only were there clashes between army units and native warriors, there were also war chiefs actively undermining the efforts of peace chiefs to prevent war from breaking out. War was the source of their economic and social standing. Among the Anglos, the conflict between the Army and the Indian Bureau over authority on the plains is pretty well known, but there were also Army officers undercutting each other for choice commands and scope of authority, and the Quaker Indian agents in the territory fighting the inertia of their own department to try and keep Indians fed and off the warpath. Most surprising was evidence that Dodge City brokers in buffalo hides, who did not send teams of hunters into the Texas Panhandle, were actually arming Cheyenne hostiles to eliminate their business competitors who were out there on the buffalo range, which gives that fight at Adobe Walls less the complexion of a cultural reckoning and something more like a mob hit. And what moved me the most were the relationships that the peace chiefs forged with the agents that were cooperative, trusting, respectful, sometimes even affectionate on both sides, to a degree that I came away absolutely convinced there did not need to be a war at all. You can say cultural conflict, but when I got into the papers, and we'll talk about original sources in a few minutes, it was not necessary. It was greed, ambition, lack of understanding, human nature that prevented peace from maintaining. Now, if we transpose those considerations into colonial Texas, I think we will discover a similar dynamic at work. So I'd like to begin this way. This is one of my favorite things that I have ever found about early immigration into Texas. It's a group of immigrants of that lower socioeconomic level headed to Texas who were observed on the road by a journalist. And I like this example because it reveals a great deal about the kind of people who are making the journey toward this new life, and also reveals a great deal about how to read such contemporary accounts. You can read an early letter, but that doesn't mean you're going to understand what they say. Now, this actually occurred during the era of the Republic, but it's absolutely true during the colonial period as well. This encounter took place in Mississippi as this family had just begun their trek westward. The passerby happened upon their camp in a creek bottom where he found a little boy seated against a wagon wheel, weeping. Asked what was the matter, the youngster shot back, "Matter? Fire and damnation, stranger! Don't you see Mammy there shaking with the ager? Daddy's gone a-fishing. Bob Stokes has gone on ahead with Nance. Sal's the corn she don't know that stick of wood from $7.50. Every one of the horses is loose. There's no meal in the wagon. The skillet's broke. The baby's in a bad fix. And I don't care a damn if I never see Texas." Well, all righty. But what a deceptive little vignette this is. The temptation is to read it lightly and laugh at this youngster's exasperation. Upon closer examination, his pint-sized tirade is packed tighter than a dressing box with information about immigrating to Texas. And we miss it all if all we do is chuckle at it. Mammy is shaken with the ague. That's ague, the chills and fever that often meant malaria, a prevalent risk of travel through the southern lowlands. She might die. Bob Stokes has gone on ahead with Nance. Families and friends traveling together frequently had to separate, with one party going on ahead in advance to find suitable campsites and resources. They had to be tracked and found. Every one of the horses is loose. Stock had to be hobbled every night, and even then sometimes wandered off, and the journey could not be resumed until they were recovered, which required trailing skills, and then caught, which was no mean feat either. There's no meal in the wagon. Cornmeal was the southern lower class staple, and to run out of it was a disaster. And Daddy's gone a-fishing. This was not a recreational excursion. There's no meal in the wagon. The skillets broke. A poor family on the road might have one cast iron skillet to their name, and if it cracked, as cast iron was eventually going to do, how are they to cook their food? The baby's in a bad fix. Infant mortality was common and heart-wrenching. What are they going to do if its mama dies? Sal's succorned, that means intoxicated on corn liquor, so we learned that even in their poverty they managed to have alcohol, and that some women of the immigrating class had a drinking problem. She don't know that stick of wood from $7.50. Such folk expressions that grew out of rural early America testify to what an accurate ear Mark Twain had, or William Dean Howells and other writers who immortalized frontier speech. In fact, that sense for pioneer Saxonism was the stock and trade of any frontier editor. And atop everything else, we learned that tots could hold their old with adults when it came to swearing. Now, these family circumstances speak volumes about the considerations and point of view of the great majority of settlers, especially the latecomers, of whom Stephen F. Austin could no longer swear out their character and industry. He called them his leather stockings, after the Fenimore Cooper character in his novels. Hang on one second. My lungs are still full of Austin pollen. You know why they call Austin the allergy capital of the world, is that it's the southern part of the Great Plains, the easternmost part of the desert, the western part of the southern woodlands, and the northern part of the Gulf Plains. If you are allergic to anything in North America, you sneeze there. Now, you remember that Austin offered large bounties, huge bounties of land to large-scale planters to come to Texas and bring their slaves and their operation to Texas. And he got almost no takers. I can think of Jared Gross. I can think of maybe one or two others. But at that time, if you lived in Tennessee or Alabama and you had it made there, you stayed there. The people who came to Texas were the ones who needed a do-over, right? Many had been ruined in the financial panic of 1819. Many were also on the run from the law or from debt or from some romantic entanglement. The West, even at this time, had already become America's greenwood into which one could disappear to reinvent oneself. And this is true even as high up the social scale as Sam Houston. We pause for a second, historical parenthetical. I think it's important to go back to original sources when doing our research, as it is the surest bypass of generations of historians adding their commentary, sometimes useful and sometimes just signals into the emphases and concerns of their own times. For two generations, for instance, the standing biography of Sam Houston was The Raven. Marquis James came out in 1929, when the whole art of biography was ruled over from England by Virginia Woolf and the Sitwells, called the Bloomsbury Group. In their view, in the main, you tell the truth, but if you need to make a few things up to add some color to the story, that's okay. You need a little splash of color. And The Raven was very much a product of this school of history. There are some things that you can pick out of The Raven For instance, James needed to have Sam Houston acquainted with Jim Bowie before he got here. So they met on a riverboat earlier. Didn't happen. They met each other, my name's Sam, after he was already in Texas. However, that doesn't mean it's a bad book. When I was researching my Sam Houston, I was using papers that had nobody's fingerprints on them except James's. And I knew he used those papers because he would use it as half a sentence in the Raven, not footnoted or anything, but he couldn't have written that half a sentence if he had not seen these letters. So it's a tremendous, I mean, it deserved that Pulitzer Prize in 1930. Absolutely deserved that Pulitzer Prize. But it's also a product of Bloomsbury history where he made stuff up. Okay, I got that off my chest. Now, when I first became aware of history, it was in the 1960s. See, what tickles me is that every generation of historians from Bloomsbury before and after, every new crop of PhD historians think they've got it figured out. They finally understand truth, and they're gonna write about it. Now, I first became aware of history in the 1960s. The era of anti-war protest, the sexual revolution, and the shortest route to recognition in the history department was to find evidence that somebody big probably died of syphilis. Oh my Lord, I remember the books. Abraham Lincoln died of syphilis. George Washington died of syphilis. The whispers in the grad student carols were that Catherine the Great died under a horse. No, no, and double no. And then when I was in college, it was the heyday of statistical history. And your history became more accurate the more decimal places you carried it out to. Not a quarter of the early Texas immigrants came to Texas by coastal schooner, but 24.889723% of the immigrants came by coastal schooner. Somehow I think it is not unrelated that this is the very time that they began marketing pocket calculators. And so now, here we are for the last few decades, deeply embedded in, I don't know, I gave up going to conferences. Cure, you might know, whether they've even given us a name yet. Ideological history, grievance history.
Oppression studies.
Oh my God. You're serious, aren't you?
That has a name.
Okay, I almost need to, okay. Thank you for that. I did not know that. Oppression studies. Are we ready for a new paradigm yet? Okay, I got that off my chest. Now, Stephen F. Austin, we remember, was required to vouch for the character and industry of those who settled in his colonies. And for a short while, oh, that worked beautifully. It almost seemed like Texas was going to become one of those rural, agrarian, utopian experiments like the later 19th century. I'm sure we've all read that account of a traveler hearing a farmer in Austin's colony reciting a Latin lesson, Tacitus, while he was slopping his hogs. But within a short period, impresarios lost control over the tide of immigrants that washed in, some legal, most not legal. And within a short time of the impresario contracts, Mexicans in East Texas were outnumbered 10-1, by count, 10-1. This is the time that American two brothers, Hayden and Benjamin Edwards, received a contract for the Nacogdoches area, impresario contract, and not only brought settlers of their own, but also claimed the authority to vacate previous land grants in the area. And they raised such a stink that they declared the Republic of Fredonia, and the whole area was in an uproar from 1826 to 1828. Now, Austin's correspondence of the time shows his absolute fidelity to the government. In fact, he leads Anglo militia in league with Mexican army in putting down the Edwards brothers. So far, Austin was having more trouble with his leather stockings than he was with the Mexican government. And Austin also wrote voluminous letters to men he trusted in East Texas to do more to involve themselves in political affairs there. Early in 1828, he wrote to J.H. Bell, "I received your letter stating that you wish to decline serving as one of the ayuntamiento, the town council, and feel somewhat discouraged at your determination. As your personal friend, I should say you did right. But as a friend of the colony, I must say you are doing wrong. It is very important to get good men, men of business, in the ayuntamiento. Now, in this case, it could be that Bell had a clearer view of the state of things. Later on, we'll talk about Manuel de Mierturan and his characterization of the town government in Nacogdoches as being hopelessly venal and corrupt. Bell probably knew that. And he probably had some reason to think that he could not help much. Austin, by the way, Austin and Josiah Bell had served in the militia together back in his Missouri days. And when Austin came from Louisiana, his first entry into Texas, where he was met by the governor and the vice governor and all that, to escort him to San Antonio, he found Josiah Bell and wife and babe in arms living as squatters in the no man's land. So Bell was probably more accustomed than Austin to living without the benefit of formal law. Oh, by the way, that babe in arms grew up to be James Hall Bell, the first native-born Texan to sit on the state Supreme Court. And he's a very particular hero of mine because when Civil War came, he was a Unionist. But that's for a different time. But who was it? Not Burke, but John Stuart Mill said, all it takes for evil to triumph is for honest men to do nothing. And Stephen F. Austin was doing his dead level best to get honest, industrious Americans on the town councils to try and change the tenor of what was going on. To one man who involved himself in the Fredonian madness, he wrote a letter on Christmas Eve. His name was B.J. Thompson. And Austin writes, and this letter goes page after page after page. We were friends in Missouri, and we ought to be friends in Texas. And I have taken up my pen to write you as your friend who takes an interest in your welfare, and I will therefore speak to you with the frankness of friendship. I have heard with the greatest astonishment that you have taken an active part in the commotions in that part of the country. My friend, I hope you will not take my frankness amiss when I say that you have committed an error. You have made the words of your enemies true, and you have jeopardized the prospects of the whole country. Now, Austin had heard that the Fredonians meant to enlist local Cherokees in their cause and try to get the Cherokees to rise up against the Mexican government. And you don't hear Stephen F. Austin swear very often, but he writes, "Great God, can it be possible that Americans, high-minded and free-born and honorable Americans, will so far forget themselves as to league with barbarians and savages in a war of murder? Write me as soon as possible and write frankly what you intend to do. I am unwilling to believe that you have all run mad." So if it comes to a clash of cultures, no, that's one way to spend your Christmas Eve, I guess. So here we have Stephen F. Austin, meek and mild, calling Hayden Edwards and the Fredonians savages. It sure sounds like Austin has thrown down a marker that they do not represent any kind of culture that he wants to represent to the Mexican authorities. Well, in making movies, what do we see from the reverse angle? What do we see? Now remember that Spain has claimed this portion of the North American interior for about 250 years. They couldn't do much when Cabeza de Vaca washed ashore in 1528, but in 1783, Governor Domingo Cabello commissioned a Texas census and found in the province a grand total of 2,819 souls, exclusive of clergy. San Antonio had 642 men and women, plus children. 554 were living at the missions, and Nacogdoches had 349, La Bahia 668. So in that not quarter of a century, but in that quarter of a millennium, Spain has increased Texas population by about, on average, 12 people per year. People in New Spain were just not interested in removing so far into the interior. It was hundreds of miles from home. There's no resources. The Indians will kill you, and they wouldn't do it. Unless we forget, San Antonio de Bexar was founded by colonists from the Canary Islands, an archipelago 100 to 500 miles off the coast of West Africa. People who didn't know any better. And they were talked into, they were promised stations. If you move to Texas, you will become hidalgos. You will be nobles. You won't have to work. Boy, were they surprised. So they leave their islands off the coast of Africa. They were escaping poverty, famine, disease, and volcanic eruptions, because it's the Canary Islands. And they got to Texas, bless their hearts. The only thing we lacked was the volcanoes. The vice-regal governments had always had trouble getting people to come to Texas. So at length, at the same time that the American population was exploding, the Mexican population was long stagnant. Now, when news of the Edwards brothers and all that hoo-ha around Nacogdoches gets to Mexico City, they sent their most capable and respected military officer, Don Manuel de Mier y Terán, on an inspection tour to recommend what to do about Texas. Now, Terán was highly educated. He was a graduate of the School of Mines, which is like one of their big colleges. He had a very successful military career in beating the Spaniards when they tried to retake Mexico. His was a character completely in harmony with Stephen F. Austin, to act honorably in performing a duty that would advance the condition of the colony. When you look at Austin and his dealing with the Mexican authorities, it's almost like the Quaker agents and the peace chiefs. If they had been left in control, there would have been no revolution, there would have been no strife. There would have been bridges to build, but that would have been done. Well, Terán gets in a great big coach with an engineer and some other people. He's also going to investigate, because he did graduate from the College of Mines, he's going to investigate the resources and talked about it. Well, when he got to Nacogdoches, by the time he got to Nacogdoches, he was gobsmacked at what he saw. And he penned a blistering letter to President Guadalupe Victoria excoriating not the American colonists nearly so much as the corrupt, venal, self-serving Mexican officials who dominated the local government. I was very surprised when I read this years ago. And General Terán writes, Mr. President, it would cause you the same chagrin that it has caused me to see the opinion that is held of our nation by these foreign colonists. So, okay, I'm going to hold a pose. That's something I learned when I talk in high schools, and there's always a high school newspaper kid crawling around below the stage. That's fine, Jim. It would cause you the same chagrin that it has caused me to see the opinion that is held of our nation by these foreign colonists, since, with the exception of some few who have been to our capital, they know no other Mexicans than those about here. And those Mexicans about there were dreadful. They, quote, comprise what is in all country called the lowest class, the very poor and very ignorant. They not only do not have sufficient means to establish schools, but they are not of the type that take any thought for the improvement of its public institutions or the betterment of its degraded condition. These local Mexican authorities, quote, set themselves against the foreigners, meaning the Americans, deliberately setting nets to deprive them of the right of franchise and to exclude them from the ayuntamiento. So Josiah Bell probably knew what he was doing when he didn't want to get involved in that mess. And the Americans had no chance of redress closer than the state capital, which shared back and forth, Monclova, Saltillo, Saltillo, Monclova, 1,000 miles away. And Terán writes, the colonists find it unendurable that they must go 300 leagues, which is 1,060 miles, to lodge a complaint against the petty pickpocketing that they suffer from a venal and ignorant alcalde. There it is. Okay. I travel in terror of losing my briefcase. They find it unendurable that they must go 300 leagues to lodge a complaint against the petty pickpocketing that they suffer from a venal and ignorant alcalde. He went on and he said much more and much worse. about the local population that he found in East Texas. Now, he did understand their problem. They're outnumbered 10 to 1 by people who are better educated, more aggressive, ready to take control, but it's their country, however poor and ignorant and they are. Tehran then, just like Austin, was drawing a distinction between the educated and the ignorant, men of duty and character versus men of self-serving passions. So which group do we want to accept as clash of cultures? By the way, Austin was in constant communication with Tehran, with General Felicula in Matamoros, with whom he had a very good relationship. And when the army moved on Nacogdoches and ran out Edwards and the Fredonians, Austin led 100 of his own militia alongside the Mexican army. He was absolutely faithful to his duty. Now, was Austin unreasonable in his expectation that people should behave honorably and pursue the public good? I have heard it said that Austin was too good for this world. But if that's true, then you have to also say that Mieri Tehran was also too good for this world. Because after Santa Anna came on the scene and Tehran caught a glimpse of the future, he was an officer in the Imperial Army of Agustin de Iturbide. He went to the spot where Iturbide had been executed and fell on his sword. He did not want to live to see what Texas was about to go through and why. Now, the honest, respectful relationships that Austin forged with political figures in Texas, Navarro de Zavala, Ruiz, even with such military figures as Mejia and Felicula, look a lot like the relationships that I researched 50 years ago between Quaker Indian agents and the peace chiefs of the Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne people. Left to themselves, their cultures would have eventually melded. By the way, another parenthesis, there's been a lot written about, the poor Native Americans, they got such a raw deal, and they did. We have almost totally forgotten that there was a sizable minority of Native Americans at that time who were ready to try assimilation into white culture. One person who I've acquired a great fondness for, she was 1/4 Ponca, 1/4 French Canadian, 1/4 Iowa, and 1/4 American. She published under the name of Suzette La Flèche. Her Indian name was Inchata Thiumba, Bright Eyes. And she passionately defended Native rights. In fact, she was the lady who translated at the trial of Chief Standing Bear when Indians were first declared to be American citizens. But she also was pretty adamant that hunting and raiding and pillaging is no life to leave to our children. We need education. We like nice things too. And it has infuriated me the way modern scholarship kind of sweeps her under the rug because we don't want to talk about that. We need the Indians to be all victims and all angry and so on. Okay, off topic. Look back further to this concept of different cultures actually getting along together until something comes along to wreck it. Look back further. Moorish Iberia, before the Reconquista, a time and place when Jews and Islamic Moors and Christians read and studied and ate and lived together in this intellectual flowering. What the hell happened? Well, bad eggs happen. Leaders of great magnetism, limited understanding, and consuming ambition happen. Among the Comanche and the Kiowa, He-Bear and Big Bow and Walks in the Sky happened. In the army, Nelson Miles happened. In 15th century Iberia, Isabella happened, driving out the Moors, burning the Jews at the stake. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That Isabella was big into her armor and her warfare. Now, none of us believes in the great man school of history anymore, with a sad little nod to Carlyle. But sometimes I think we use their counterweights, the forces of history and clash of cultures, to avoid blaming anyone. It's like, we have become the Mr. Rogers of history. Would you be my neighbor? But we have to take some account of Santa Anna. And I think, not to be too oblique, that those of us today who are shocked at how quickly the trajectory of an entire nation can turn on a dime when power is assumed by a sociopathic narcissist have not been studying their Texas history. Educated, sophisticated people are responsible for their actions. Ignorant, violently disposed people are equally responsible for their actions. And historians have two mighty big jobs to do. To parse the past for what it should mean to us, and to relate it to the public in general to guide their choices for the future. Now, was Stephen F. Austin responding to the forces of history when he took up his father's colonial contract in New Spain? Of course he was. If it had not been for the Panic of 1819, I doubt he could have rounded up 50 people to come to Texas. These people had a big motivation. But I also think that he transcended the forces of history when he conceived of Texas as a new center of civilization where there wasn't any before. Remember, Spain couldn't get anybody to move here. How do you dream bigger than that? Right? And then make it happen? That is the glory of studying history. And it makes me crazy that we live in a society in which, by numerous studies, nearly 80%, not of the general public, but 80% of recent college graduates cannot identify the Emancipation Proclamation. They cannot associate James Madison with the Constitution. We all remember Jimmy Kimmel and his man on the street interviews where they would ask historical questions to people who were they thought it was so funny they had no clue about anything about our history and think it was funny. 51% of American people do not know what country dropped atomic weapons in war. Who is the only one that ever dropped a bomb? 51% don't know. Of the 45% who do know, well, what president ordered this? 25% said Ronald Reagan. 24% said Bill Clinton. And the remainder was divided between George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Now, okay, I'm running out of time. I think that it has not been helpful that what they call the academy, those mysterious offices in college where it says history department over the door, it has not been helpful that they have almost entirely withdrawn from presenting history to the people that most need to learn it, which is thee and me, and left the job to public historians whom they can then snipe at and call them amateurs. Well, the great C.L. Sonicson, the grand old man of Borderlands history, now dead 35 years, and he had been a president of the Western History Association, wrote near the end of his career, and I want you to listen to this, history stopped being relevant when academics stopped writing to the public and began writing to each other. Right? I read that and I thought, oh my God, he was a prophet. America today is in danger of losing the democracy in good measure because of this vapid, wall-eyed ignorance of the humanities out there. If we can recover from these times, which I doubt, but if we can, serious history, compellingly written and published with commitment, has to be an important step in any national recovery. And as I was preparing this, I saw a news item 3 days ago that the European Union has set aside a whole bunch of money to begin just such an education effort through Europe. I don't really see that happening now when we've ordered national museums to start erasing women and black people from the exhibits. But why do I think history is so important? Because as I've said and said and said, and I will keep saying until I hit the grave, it's important because everything that you believe about everything that's important in the world, what's right, what's wrong, what's moral, what's immoral, how should you live, vote, worship, raise your children, everything that you believe filters like coffee through what you ever understood about history or not. It affects your view of every social hoo-ha today, whether it's women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and we live in a portion of the country that is dominated by evangelical religion, which I think in Texas history, and I love the guy as a historical character, Sumner Bacon, the first evangelical Presbyterian to want to come preach in Texas. And there's a wonderful picture of him. It's a meme. He's got his Bible, he's got his pistol, right? He applied to the Arkansas Presbytery for a license to come preach in Texas. They turned him down and they said, you really should learn to read first. So is it any wonder that we got a Southern Evangelical church that walked the plank for slavery, walked the plank against women voting, walked the plank for prohibition, and really no new light has shone into that room now that they think they've got women's rights and gay people figured out? No. So I have spent my career trying to do what I can to advance the art of history. And now I have published University of Texas, University of Oklahoma, and I've seen how few of those books ever filter down to real people. That's why I have such immense respect for people like David McCullough, who wrote brilliantly, but for the people. I have certain favorites of my own. Barbara Tuchman, 2 Pulitzer Prizes. Guns of August, right? Couldn't get a teaching job because she didn't have a PhD. She's not one of us, right? But to continue to do this, it would be very helpful for those of us in the fray if serious history would begin to be addressed again to real people. And I don't think you can find a more colorful, compelling subject than Texana. I really don't. I could go on all day, but I'm out of time. I will end this way, my intent right now is to work out my career. And I have a little tag over my desk, a quote from Henry James that says, we work in the dark, we do what we can, we give what we have. Our doubt is our passion is our task. The rest is the madness of art. And so back to it. I think we've got time for a few questions, but failing that, I will thank you for your kind attention.